Amp sims are all the rage right now, and I'm not just talking about the young kids. Pretty much everybody from amateur musicians to weekend warriors to like professional musicians, everybody is using these things either in the studio or on stage. And we certainly use them here in the studio when we're filming these videos, and we get a lot of questions and comments being like, what the heck are these things? So in this video, we're going to go through exactly what an amp sim is, how it compares to a real amp, and how to choose the right one for you. Let's get into it. Good day, friends. Thank you so much for joining me on this video. My name is Justin Waterfield. I work here at the Bloor Street Long McQuade store in Toronto, Ontario. Really appreciate you joining me today. We got a lot of cool stuff to cover. Stay with me right till the end. Please like and subscribe if you dig what we're doing here. It really helps out the channel. Now I got a question for you. You heard me play on the intro, and I played through one of these lovely amp sims that I got in front of me. Question is, can you figure out which one I used? Actually, I got a better question for you. Does it matter which one I used? The point is, these are all tools to get things done, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is these lovely tools. These are all amp sims, and we're going to be talking about them in terms of what features they have at the different price points they are. So this is not a comparison video. This is not a, hey, this is better than this, and that does this better than the other thing. No, none of that. These are all great in their own right, and I've selected the products today because they all do something unique from each other. And that's really the point here. And we got stuff from $100 all the way up to a couple of $1,000 and everything in between. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. Stay tuned right till the end. I think you're going to learn something here. So, what exactly is an amp sim? An amp sim is a simulation of a guitar amp without having an actual guitar amp. It replicates the sound and the feel of a guitar amp. And it can be either analog circuit or it can be digital. You can have both. And sometimes both in the same package. That's cool too. They typically have amp controls, so like gain, bass, middle, treble. Some of them have separate reverb controls, presence, resonance, all things that you would find on a solid state or a tube amp. The digital ones specifically, and sometimes the analog ones, also let you use headphones. So they let you play in environments where you couldn't otherwise play a guitar amp, somewhere where you got to keep quiet, like, you know, your house in the middle of the night and you don't want to wake the neighbors or the family. You can do that. And specifically for the digital ones, you can usually record direct to your computer through USB connectivity. This is a huge thing because now you don't need a separate audio interface to run through. You just connect the amp sim itself to the computer, your guitar goes into the amp sim, and there it is. There's your tone, no muss, no fuss. So why would somebody use an amp sim versus a real amp? Well, amps are big, they're heavy, and they're loud. There's no getting around it. Most tube amps sound best when they're loud. Okay, that's what rock and roll is based on. It's based on tube amps being turned up way past their design limits, and they distort or they add character to the sound, and that is the sound of electric guitar. Now, amp sims, by comparison, are small, they're light, and they can be very, very quiet. These are huge pluses in those of us that don't have the luxury of a big space where we can make noise, right? Not all of us have the ability to turn our tube amps up as loud as they need to be to sound their best. Amp sims give you a lot of that great tube sound that we know and we love with minimal volume. So that is a huge selling point right then and there. Most amp sims also give you a variety of sounds within the unit. So you can have your British Marshall sounds, you can have your American Fender sounds, you can have your heavy metal sounds, you can have your this or your that or whatever. Especially the digital units let you access a lot of these different sounds in one package. You also get more connectivity options. And by that I mean a lot of these, especially at the higher price points, have stereo outputs, right? So you can have slightly different sound on the left and the right, which combined down to mono, or even just kept stereo, can sound much bigger than just a mono amp on its own. The other thing, specifically with digital pedals, is the inclusion of MIDI. MIDI is such a great facet to controlling these things remotely from other devices, or getting multiple devices to talk to each other and work in tandem. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. The other major selling point that I've already mentioned is most of these can record direct. That is such a huge plus. Most of us are making our own records in our own homes or our own studios on our own time. So amp sims offer really quick, easy, accessible way to record yourself on guitar and get it to tape, as it were, as quickly and easily as possible. So if you have the choice, when do you decide to use an amp sim, and when do you decide to use a real amp? Okay, so let's tackle the first one first. So amp sims are great for any time you got to move around, right? If you can put together a pedal board with your amp sim on it and just shove that in a bag, that just makes your transit to the gig that much easier, right? Especially if you're flying in somewhere to do a fly date, right? If you have to fly from one city to another, play that show, you don't want to check in amps or like hire sketchy backline. You want to play with your own stuff. That's where amp sims come in. It's the same sound and it travels with you wherever you go. You also get a lot of tonal options with minimal gear. Like I said, you can save presets on a lot of these amp sims, especially the digital ones. So you can have access to a lot of different sounds in a tiny little package. That gives you a lot of flexibility if you're going in, like I said, to like a studio or something, and maybe you're not sure what to expect. Maybe the tones you thought would work aren't really working. Well, it's real easy to tweak it. It's all right there. The last instance where I think it would be really prudent to have an amp sim in your arsenal is if making noise is a problem. Like I said, most of us, especially who live in the cities, are living in a very crowded area. We don't have the ability to play our stuff loud. Not all of us have jam spaces. Not all of us have houses or basements or soundproofing or whatever. But you can't just stop playing guitar. You can't stop loving the sound of your amp. So why not just pick something small, portable, with a headphone output, and then you can rock out at all hours of the night and not bother anybody. Very, very big plus. So the question then, with all these pluses for amp sims, is when would you choose to use a big, heavy, loud, real amp? And the answer is really simple. If you prefer it. Okay? There's no substitute for pushing air and cranking this thing really loud. It is an experience. It's a visceral thing that connects you with the instrument. And I'm sorry, there's no substitution for it. If you can have a real amp and an amp sim, do it. There's nothing like it. You're interacting with a living, breathing thing. And that's what rock and roll is all about. That being said, these are all just tools. And we need to use them to create our art. And it really doesn't matter what you use, whether it's a real amp or an amp sim. These are all colors in our paint box. Use them however you see fit to make the music that you like. So what is available at all these different price points that I was alluding to earlier? Well, we get some headphone amps, we get some single sound pedals, we get some digital pedals, we get some multi-effects pedals, we get pedal board mounted amplifiers that can drive their own speaker cabinet. There's a lot of stuff to cover here. And at each price point, you do get certain features that you don't get on others, right? Obviously, the more expensive units are going to have more ins and outs, more processing power, more available to you. But you know what? The smaller analog stuff has a certain feel and a certain character about it that you don't necessarily get in the higher end digital stuff. So don't worry too much about paying a lot of money to get the best thing. It's about what's right for you. And that's what we're going to go through right now. We're going to go through the reasons why you would choose this unit over that unit. Today we're going to be talking about the Vox Amplug 2, the AC30 model, the Catalinbread Sabbra Cadabra, the Hughes and Kettner Ampman Classic, the Tech 21 SansAmp GT2, the Boss IR200, the Walrus ACS1, the IK Multimedia ToneX, the Line 6 HX Stomp, and the Neural DSP Quad Cortex. Let's start off with the Vox Amplug. So what do we have here? This is a little headphone practice amp, believe it or not. That's what's making all that great sound. It is an analog circuit that models the Vox AC30, but it has digital effects, and that's that echo and reverb that you heard. This is a great all-in-one practice solution. So if you're on the go, or if you need something to take up to the cottage, or just something small and low profile to keep, you know, anywhere where you don't want to take up space with anything too big, this is about as small as you're going to get. It has this little retractable jack on the back, and you click it out, you plug it directly into your guitar. This will fit a Gibson style or Fender style, just basically anything. And then you connect your headphones to it. You do need wired headphones, and off you go. It is super simple. You don't get like comprehensive controls on this. You get gain, you get tone, you get volume, and that's really about it. You also get an auxiliary input, so you can jam along with some other tunes from your phone or wherever you source that stuff from. Really, really cool little unit. It's well under $100. I think everybody should have one of these just for like late night practicing, if nothing else. Definitely check these out. Don't discount them because they're small. They're awesome. Make way for the Sabbra Cadabra from Catalinbread. This is an all-analog pedal that models Tony Iommi's Black Sabbath guitar tone in a pedal in the tiniest possible format. This is a model of the Laney Supergroup amp that he used back in the 60s with a Dallas Rangemaster in front of it, and that's how he got all those classic doomy, fuzzy guitar tones. And what we have here is a really simple setup. We have a presence knob, which is how much treble you have. You have your gain control. You have the range, which is the volume of the Rangemaster hitting the front end of the amp. And then you have the volume 4 control. And you Black Sabbath fans will be, you know what I mean when that just warms the cockles of my heart. So for this pedal, this is running into a speaker simulator. That's how we recorded this. This pedal on its own really needs some sort of speaker with it. It's almost a little too fizzy on its own, and that's really what it's designed for. You can pair it with another speaker simulator like, for example, the Universal Audio HX Stomp, or a Hughes and Kettner Red Box, or an IR if you're recording it direct to your computer, or with an IR loader, or just run it into a clean amp like a deluxe reverb. That's really what this is for. It gives you a Laney Supergroup amp and a Dallas Rangemaster, like the iconic Doom, amp rig in a tiny little box. Do not sleep on this one. This thing is mad wicked. This is the Hughes and Kettner Amp Man Classic. This is actually one of the more unique offerings we have on the table today. What we have here is an all-analog circuit. It's built to go on a pedal board, but it is actually a legitimate amplifier. Believe it or not, there's a 50-watt power amp in this thing that can push a speaker cabinet, so 112, a 212, a 412, whatever you got. So this can go on your pedal board, save you from carrying another, heavy amp, and bring your cabinet and off you go, or use whatever's at the venue. Very cool option. We got a lot of controls for the power amp and not so many for the preamp. I kind of like this setup. You get tone and gain for the preamp, so how much gain and distortion you want and how bright or dark you want that distortion to be. But then in the power amp section, you get resonance and presence, which is like how bright or how deep you want the sound and how that brightness and deepness interacts with the speaker cabinet you have. Very, very cool. And then you have this sagging control, which tries to emulate like a tube rectifier or power tubes that are just driven to their absolute limit. It really adds a lot of character to this pedal. And we've got a whole host of other connections. We have headphone outs, we have auxiliary in, we have an effects loop send and return. So for all intents and purposes, it is a full-featured amp. But the interesting thing, and the thing that we've got going right now, is it has a built-in red box. So you can record direct with this thing using cabinet simulation. And again, all analog. There's nothing digital on this thing. And this is just basically just going straight out to the camera, and that's what you're hearing. And as far as these kind of things go, these smaller analog circuits, these solid-state amps, this one's pretty dynamic. You heard me roll back the volume there and get clean. And this is really sort of a going theme, even though it may not seem like it, is all of these amps can do distorted and clean, right? It's not just one or the other. This one does a really good job of doing both. You should definitely check it out. This is the Tech 21 SansAmp GT2. This is the OG amp simulator. This thing still sounds boss today. It is all analog. The amp sim, the speaker sim, it feels so great to play. This thing is, if you want high gain, this is the one to get, I think. This thing has 3 different models for the amp, 3 different gain types. We got clean, we got high gain, we got hot wired, which is even more gain, if you can imagine that. And then we get 3 different, mic on cabinet positions. We get center, we get off axis, and then we get the classic voicing. I've gone for a pretty classic metal, kind of Motley Crue kind of sound here. What we also get is these EQ knobs. These are active EQs that come after the distortion circuit. So this is almost like you recorded an amp and you want to tweak the EQ after the fact. That's what these do. So they're really, really, really powerful in terms of the scope and the sweep that these things have. This is such a great pedal if you want, classic sounds. It does the modern sort of scoop stuff. It can do like the extended range 7/8 strings, but if you're looking for like classic rock, classic metal, Metallica and Anthrax and Motley Crue and Def Leppard, all that kind of stuff, this is the box for you. This is a magic box right here. This thing is absolutely one of my favorites, and I'm glad that SansAmp still makes this thing to this day. Yeah, this is the Boss IR200. This is where things start to get a little different. This is a totally digital pedal that is primarily an IR loader, but it also has an amp simulator and reverbs built in. So what exactly is an IR loader? Well, IR stands for impulse response, and there's a lot of science that goes into it that I don't necessarily completely understand, but the gist of it is that an impulse response is a snapshot of a particular speaker's frequency response over time. And what that does is it gives you the personality of a speaker in a particular cabinet being mic'd with a particular microphone. Every speaker will translate sound in its own way. Not every speaker reproduces the exact same frequencies in exactly the same way. And that's what makes certain people prefer Marshall cabinets versus Mesa cabinets versus Orange cabinets versus Engel or Diesel cabinets. These can have very different speakers. These can also have the same speakers just in a different enclosure that makes them behave differently. And IRs capture all this behavior into a digital file that you load into something like this, the IR200, and that really gives you such a realistic personality of what this speaker is and how it's going to influence the amp. So I mentioned that this also has an amp sim in it, which it does. So I was on the British stack setting, but it also has all sorts of stuff. It has the tweed combo, it has a diamond amp. I'll give you 3 guesses what that is, and the first 2 don't count. Let's see what else we got. All sorts of metal, we got bass amps in there. We've got a lot of cool things under the hood. We've got some room, hall, and plate reverbs, but the star of the show is the IR loading. You can load in any IR file that you find on the internet. You can find them for free. You can buy them from like Celestion, I know that they offer really good ones. There's a bunch of third-party creators that do that as well. You can load them up into here. This is a stereo output, so you can do one IR on the left and one IR on the right. And this would actually be a great pedal to pair with something like the Catalinbread, now that I think about it. This is at its best when it's running into some sort of speaker simulator, as I already mentioned. If you run this into something like this, right, doesn't have to be this, but an IR loader, and especially if you load it with like a Laney cabinet IR, that is going to give you the full experience. Do not sleep on this IR200. This is a really, really powerful pedal. This is one of my favorites. This is the Walrus ACS1. This is so cool. It models 3 different amps. So we have a Fender, we have a Marshall, and we have a Vox. We have 3 different IRs that you can access. Again, Fender, Marshall, and Vox. But what we get here is something really interesting. Instead of it just being a stereo out to give you a wider spread, this thing really acts more as in dual mono mode. So what do I mean by that? You can set this thing up to have 1 amp coming out of the left channel and 1 amp coming out of the right channel with totally different independent settings and get them working together. And it sounds like there's 2 guitars in 2 separate rooms. You can record each guitar to its own track, and it's almost like you're double tracking in 1 take. It sounds so massive. For those of you who have not played with like a dual amp setup, this is a revelation. I do this in real life. I use 2 tube amps at the same time, and I usually space them out on stage. And playing through both at one time gives you a way bigger, louder, fuller sound than just one big, loud amp on its own. It's because each amp and each speaker has its own personality and really fills out the holes in what the other one has and vice versa. And that is very much the experience that you get in this pedal. This Walrus Mako ACS1 is the closest that I've come to playing an amp sim that sounds the way that real amps do in a room. And it's because it's two amps at the same time, and it's because they're not quite aligned with each other. One will come in a little bit early, one will come in a little bit late. Maybe one has a little bit more reverb on it, one's got a little bit more grind on it and gain on it than the other. It's just so much fun. It is a little fiddly to control because you got to flip back and forth between the left and the right side and remember your settings for this and that, but it does have presets and you can scroll through them, and there's 3 on the device. You can access many, many more through MIDI. So that's what these ports are on the back. So what exactly is MIDI? Long story short, MIDI is a set of instructions that can be sent from device to device. So if you got 2 pedals that have MIDI, they can actually talk to each other and send each other instructions. So for example, if I have my distortion setting, which you just heard, but on my, say, clean preset, I want to have a bit of reverb. If I had a MIDI-enabled reverb pedal, something like a Strymon Timeline or the Big Sky rather, I could set this up so that when this changes to clean, it'll activate my reverb on the Big Sky, and when I switch it back to the distortion, it'll bypass the reverb. That is just so, so cool. Much less tap dancing and hitting this pedal, hitting that pedal on your pedal board. Man, MIDI makes life so much easier. As guitar players, we kind of, we get a little bit nervous with technology and stuff like that, but do not be afraid of MIDI. That's what really makes all this work that we're going to see in a couple of more pedals. But just as an introduction, that's some of what MIDI can do for you. And that's very much a big feature on the Walrus ACS1. This is the IK Multimedia ToneX. Here we got something really cool. So this is a big pedal, got lots of knobs, lots of foot switches. It is dedicated to one thing and one thing only, amp simulation, right? But it does this amp simulation in a really interesting way. Instead of modeling the sound and the feel through different sort of techniques and software and programming this stuff in, this pedal has a software component that you run on your Mac or your PC. What it does is it lets you hook up a real tube amp to your recording interface, like a reamp setup, for those of you who are familiar with that. And it sends a test signal out to your amp, and you record the result either through a speaker cabinet or through a direct box like a 2-notes torpedo capture or something like that, or a Hughes and Kettner red box. And it computes the difference between the sound going in and the sound coming out. And by doing that and building an algorithm around it, it profiles your existing amp. And that is what you can upload into this thing. So the sound you just heard is my own 1969 Trainer YBA2A. This is a little 6v6 powered head, probably about 18 to 20 watts. It's tiny. It was made here in Toronto way back when, even before I was born. It's one of my treasured amps, and I profiled it, and it's on here. And I've heard a lot about profiling amps for many, many years, and I did not believe the hype until I gave this thing a try. This is serious, serious magic. Hyperbole aside, I don't know how IK Multimedia do their DSP or computer sorcery, but this legitimately sounds like my amp. And I did blind tests with this as well. where I would just hear somebody play this patch. I'd be like, oh yeah, that's exactly my amp. It was really, really weird, but very cool. So apart from modeling your own stuff, you can tap into other people's models that they upload onto something called ToneNet, which is, again, accessible through the software. You can download those models onto the unit itself. It comes preloaded with all sorts of different models and snapshots of all these amps. Comes preloaded with IRs. You can load your own, of course. This is a really, really, really cool unit to use in conjunction with other effects pedals. You can run effects into it, you can run it out to other effects, or you could just use this if you're a straight into the amp kind of guy or gal. Just use that on stage and away you go. So you get 3 different foot switches here to switch between 3 different sets of amps, and then you can page forward, and now you got another set of 3 amps. Page forward, and another set of 3 amps. You also get controls for bass, middle treble, gain. You get alt functions, so a little bit of reverb to give your sound a little bit more space. You also get a built-in compressor and a built-in noise gate. But that's really as far as this thing goes for effects. It's not an effects engine, it is an amp modeler. So don't let the size fool you. This is not an all-in-one solution. But man, if you've got a collection of amps and you don't want to haul those things in and out of clubs anymore, and you want to save your back and your muscles, get down on the ToneX. This thing is so, so cool. This is the always dependable, always awesome Line 6 HX Stomp. And this is actually my own personal pedal board. I brought this here in this setup to show you specifically what this thing can do. So, first of all, this thing has got a whole lot of really, really detailed, really accurate amp models built into it. It has Fenders, it has Voxes, it has Marshalls, it has really off the beaten path stuff like Matchless. It's got a Sun Model T, which is one of my favorites. It's got a Friedman, it's got a Diesel in there, it's got all kinds of stuff. It's got all kinds of IRs built in, and it's also got all kinds of effects built in. Line 6 really made their name on amp modeling, but also effects modeling. And you get all the delays, all the modulation, all the reverbs, all packed into this tiny little thing that lives on your pedal board and gives you probably some of the most comprehensive connectivity out of anything we've seen today. So what do I mean by that? Check this out. I've got a basic rock sound here. So that's just one of my IRs being fed by an amp model. I don't even remember exactly what this one is. Oh, okay, so this is the Model T. This is my favorite one. And I've got all my favorite distortions and fuzzes here. So here, what I'm doing is I'm feeding the flat iron fuzz from Electro Harmonics into the Model T, and that Model T is reacting exactly how a real one would into the cabinet simulator that I like. And this really points to a lot of the flexibility that this unit can do for you. I'll show you another example. I got another foot switch here set up for. And that has both the flat iron fuzz and the dispatch master, which is my delay and reverb, coming together into this little setup that I got here. So what's interesting about this is I've got the flat iron going into the front end of the amp model, but I have the delay and reverb between the amp and the cabinet, right? This is what I mean by comprehensive connectivity. I've got my drives in one loop, so they can be switched in and out separately. And I've got my delay and reverb here on a separate loop that can be switched in and out separately, depending on which of these presets, or which of these snapshots, I should say, I select within each preset. And then I got this MIDI controller over here, which sends commands over to the HX telling it, okay, select, scroll these presets, and now I'm going to select this one, and now I'm on my Fender preset. And then I have all these snapshots to give me different combinations of pedals. This is so, so powerful that you can switch in your existing pedals into like a digital amp setup. You can feed this directly out to, like we got this feeding out to the camera right now. You can feed it out to the front of house. You can feed one out to like a stage monitor and the other to a recording desk, like whatever you want. It has so much going for it in such a tiny little package. I cannot recommend this thing enough. And that's really why I brought this down here, to show you guys what's possible with it other than it just sounding like $1 million. Definitely check this one out if you haven't already. Last, but certainly not least, is the Neural DSP Quad Cortex. This is by far, hands down, no questions asked, the most capable of all the units we've talked about so far. Capable in the sense of connectivity, in terms of the inputs and the outputs. Capable in terms of the processing power available under the hood. Capable in the sense of running like software from your computer, Neural DSP software, you can run on this device. In terms of capturing and profiling amps, like we saw with the ToneX, can be done on the device itself. This is a self-contained mothership of a amp sim. It does everything self-contained. It has a Wi-Fi chip in it, believe it or not, so it can connect to your Wi-Fi at home if you want to do software updates or do cloud backup. So basically, like if you have all your patches set up, you can upload those to the cloud and say you got to run off to Europe to do your European tour or whatever. You get there, you rent one of these, and you can download all those patches through the internet, and you're right back where you started, even though you don't have your individual unit. This does it all. So why would you need all this crazy connectivity? Well, tell you what, here's just one wild scenario. You're in a power trio, right? Yourself, guitar player, and a bass player, and a drummer. And you want to keep your setup as minimal as possible. You plug in your guitar into input 1. Your bass player plugs into input 2. Your guitar comes out of outputs 1 and 2. Your bass player comes out of outputs 3 and 4. You each have your own lane of processing power on the screen here, and you basically choose your own amps, choose your own effects, and you go. And you get a bass amp and you get a guitar amp in one unit. That's it. Isn't that wild? Like, this thing can do stuff like that. This thing can handle more inputs. It can, you know, what I was talking about with the HX Stomp in terms of loops of pedals, and have all your distortions in one loop and all your ambient effects in another loop or whatever. This thing's got even more loops to do stuff like that. It's got really comprehensive MIDI control. It does absolutely everything. But the other big differentiator here is the interface. Look at this, right? Touch screen, right? And you can adjust things on the screen like you would on your phone or your iPad. But also, check this out. These foot switches here become encoders, right? So you can turn the actual foot switch instead of just clicking it. And now we've got like all sorts of, you know, cool things going on here. Now we got a looper block and whatever. But you can also just like use these as you would amp knobs or switches or what have you. This, man, like the amount of stuff that you can do with this thing is just unfreaking believable. It's awesome and well worth the money. So that about wraps things up for what is on the table in front of me, but these are by no means the only options for amp sims that you should consider. There's plenty more that didn't make an appearance today, and there's plenty more behind me that didn't get any screen time. This guy over here is the Fender ToneMaster Pro that does a lot of the same things that the Quad Cortex does at a very similar price in terms of the inputs, the outputs, the connectivity, the effects loops, the processing power available, the touchscreen interface, the knobs or the foot switches that you can turn like knobs. We've also got the Universal Audio amp sim pedals. We've got the Woodrow. We've got the Dream 65. We got the Ruby. We've got the Lion. I did a video on the Lion. The link should be up here somewhere. We've even got you know, a partner to this thing, the amp plug. We have the Boss Katana Go, which is a all digital headphone amp that you plug directly into your guitar. And I did a video about that. Link is somewhere up above there. There's so many more. I mean, there's the Strymon Iridium, there's the Big Helix, there's the HX1. There's so many different amp sims out there. The important part to consider when choosing the amp sim for you is what do you want this thing to do and how do you want to interact with it? Some people need a big visual interface and they need to be able to touch the screen. That's cool. There are those. There's some people that don't want any screen. They just want knobs. That's cool. There you go. Some people want to be able to use you know, an amp sim with what they already have. That's cool. Here you go. There's something for everybody. And truth be told, I think everybody should have at least one amp sim for some sort of situation that might come up. Either you need to practice late at night, you're like studying before the big gig and you want to get all your riffs down or whatever, you know, but you can't make noise late at night. Cool. Use an amp sim. You need to, you know, track your guitar in a really quick and really easy way and get it off to, you know, be mixed or whatever. Cool. Use an amp sim. You know, like there's so many different uses for these than just playing, you know, gigs through them. If that's not your thing, that's cool too. Keep using your amp. But a lot of these can really integrate into your existing setup in really fun ways. So don't discount them. Don't follow this whole, you know, oh, you know, real musicians use amps. Look, these are tools. Whatever you use to make music doesn't matter. Just make the music. Okay? Please do me a favor. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me on this video. I really, really appreciate it. Everything we talked about today is available at either the Long McQuade in store nearest you or on our website at longmcquade.com. Links to everything will be in the description below. Please like and subscribe if you dig what we're doing here. It really helps out the channel. Again, my name is Justin Waterfield. Thank you so, so much. I'll see you again on the next one.